We're starting out talking about improvising as learning how to take a melody and dress it up, add spice to it. Let's talk about the elements of adding spice to that melody. How do we do that? This applies to all instruments, by the way. This is something that applies to all instruments. So the first thing we're going to do, when we're dressing up a melody or ornament a melody, as it says on your syllabus, is we want to add extra notes. There's a science to this. So let's say we have You Are My Sunshine. What's the first way to add extra notes? Double up. Now that's a little primitive, but it's going to get you started in fleshing out and dressing up the melody. As soon as you double up, then you think, why can't I add notes on either side of a melody note? Right there. How about I go down and then up and then back to the melody? We're going to put bookends on either side of a melody note. It's going to sound like this. See? So now not only are we doubling up notes, we're adding notes on either side of the melody note. These are things that all good improvisers are doing, but for some reason no one talks about it. You're expected to figure it out on your own after, so many back porch sessions and late night jams. Now, after we do adding notes, then each instrument has its own way of adding left-hand ornaments, or as I call it, LHO, left-hand ornaments. Let's talk about that. What are they? You should have this memorized, if not, take notes. The slide, the hammer, and the pull-off. Now, guitar people, being generally, focused on themselves, can also do bends where, since we have longer and thinner strings, we can go. They like to push the strings aside. More of a rock and roll technique. We're not focusing on that for a minute because banjos don't have enough sustain and mandolins have double strings and you'll injure yourself. So we're just going to focus on pull-offs, hammer-ons, and slides. Let me demonstrate on the mandolin. I know it's kind of silly, but you really want to take a basic song like You Are My Sunshine and see how many LHOs you can get into that melody. It's like a game. So I would go right there. I'm going to slide up to that B note. Pull off, slide, hammer, pull off, slide, pull off, slide, pull off, hammer, slide. So I'm overdoing it on purpose, but the more you can do that, the more it's going to dress up that melody in a really accessible and easy way to do it. Let me demonstrate. Slide, pull off, slide, hammer, pull off, okay? That's the other element of ornamenting melody. Then number 3 of ornamenting the melody is adding licks. Now we get a little more instrument specific. You want to be collecting these little phrases, 2-measure phrases that we call licks in folk and bluegrass music. Let's say there's one in G, or C, or D. Now, if we start adding those into our melody in certain parts of the song, usually during the end of a phrase, we have a truly different animal. Now watch You Are My Sunshine with licks added. Here we go. See? Lick. Practice. Lick. Lick. It gives it much more authority. Same with the banjo. We could do the same thing. Now, we're not talking Scruggs style yet. We're talking basic melodies. So basically, if you have, let's switch back to Coming Around the Mountain. I'm going to give you an example. And this is something I want you all to do on your own. You take a basic melody. You play it first. And now I'm going to put my lick in after every phrase. Watch. Lick. Lick. These are all things you can get from me in tablature at your next lesson. There's enough bluegrass licks out there to bury a village, but I have more if you need them, okay? So when we talk about ornamenting the melody, we've covered 3 areas. Adding notes, if your doubles are on either side of the melody note. We talked about left-hand ornaments, and we talked about adding licks. Finally, I have item 4 under section A2, very complicated, and this is taking short flights. Here's a great drill you can do. Go back and forth from playing a melody to improvising, and then coming right back to the net, which is your melody. Here's a short flight on the mandolin. Here's my improv. Back to the melody. Improv. So you don't have to strictly do melody or strictly improv. You can play the melody as your runway, take little short flights, and come back to the melody. That'll give you the feeling of improvising without creating too much trauma. Any questions on that? Keep them brief. Raise your hand if you have one that's very pressing, and I will give you a brief explanation. Okay, good. I see we all are smugly knowledgeable about this. This is good. So now, section B, abandoning the melody, following the chords. First, number 1 rule of following chords. To follow chords, you need chords. You're going to have someone sitting next to you playing the chords, or guess what? One of my backing tracks, or any of the million backing tracks on YouTube. Because then you'll know if you sound good or not. So let's talk about this for a second. When you're playing along with a chord progression, the first thing is knowing the 1, 4, and 5 of the scale. We talked about that. The second thing is, what kind of scale are we going to play? In folk music and bluegrass and rock and roll, there are more scales than on a 1,000-pound tuna fish. There's a lot of scales out there to choose from. First of all, we want to learn the major/minor. Those of you who work with me privately know that I like to lump those together. If you have a G scale, same as E minor. Shares the same key signature. Does everyone sort of understand that? Okay. If not, don't worry. I'll tell you when you're older. Just trust me, they are the same. So let's do this. Let's say the song sounds like this. Another annoyingly happy hillbilly song. Guess what? Major scale. Now, let's say the song sounds like this. Dark and creepy. Guess what? Minor scale. So, here's the beauty of this. Let's say the song's in E minor. And you can hear that and you go, that's a dark song, it's kind of sad. Someone's dog ran off, his wife left him, whatever. It's country music. We want to play a minor scale. So it's E minor. Those of you who know the relative majors and minors will say, well, it's the same as my G scale. Play the G scale over A minor, you're good to go. Now, let's say you hear something that's kind of like bluesy, bluegrassy, you know. This is where that hybrid scale that some of you know called the bluegrass scale comes in. So pens at the ready. A pentatonic scale goes 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 1. This is the most simple scale in the universe. Everybody should know it because guess what? All that did was take a major scale and remove the 4 and the 7. You probably noticed those were missing. You know why that's safer? Because the 4 and the 7 are most likely to cause dissonance in most songs. They're the danger notes. If you take those out, you get this. See how innocent that sounds? Here's the major scale. No, re, mi, right? It's got that 7 in there. It can cause problems. Even the 4 can be dissonant. We take out those, we get this. It's like a Disney scale. It's so safe. Now, we take that 5-note pentatonic, we add in 2 special notes that are called blue tones, the flat 3 and the flat 7, and you have the bluegrass scale. Some of you are nodding, you know this one, we use it a lot. So now what happens, here's my pentatonic scale. I'm going to add in the flat 3, flat 7. Now listen to this new beast. It sounds like this. Really cool. So the bluegrass for folk scale, here's the formula. 1, 2, flat 3, 3, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. That what you wrote down should read 1, 2, flat 3, 3, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. Notice it's still missing the 4 and the 7, the trouble notes, the danger notes, okay? Now, finally, number 4 in scale families. We're going to talk about 2 modes. What are modes? I know we covered this in our theory class, but it's handy to go over it because it's really useful. Think of it this way. If music was colors, you'd have major keys, which are bright reds. You'd have minor keys, which are sad and dark blue. The modes are all the colors in between, light purple, green. There's not just major and minor, there's subtler flavor. So there's a scale called the Mixolydian scale, and it's a major scale with a flat 7. That's a formula you want to memorize if you haven't already memorized. So watch what happens when you flat the 7. Now that's the major. Here's the flat 7. Ooh. It's just a little bit bluesy. It's like, it's got some problems, but it doesn't focus on them. It keeps moving ahead. So that's the idea of the Mixolydian scale. It works on every bluegrass and folk jam because it's the perfect amount of blues versus happy. So you'll hear songs like Old Joe Clark. The melody itself is built on the Mixolydian scale. Very cool. There's a mode I want you to learn called the Dorian mode. Okay? It is a minor scale with a natural 6. It's like minor light. It's a really cool scale. I'm going to tell you the formula. 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. Now, if we were writing a natural minor scale, it would have said flat 6. Okay? If you don't catch one of these notes, don't worry. This class will be uploaded to YouTube as well, so you can go back over it. But it's good practice in note-taking. Let's listen to this. There's the natural normal minor scale. Here's the Dorian when we raise the 6. It's a little brighter. It's like I said, minor light. Great scale for like any Appalachian tune, Shady Grove, Wayfaring Stranger, anything in a minor key. Okay? So now if I'm jamming some bluegrass jam in G minor, I'm going to play my Dorian minor scale. I'm going to go. It's dark enough. It's really, really cool. Switching over to the mandolin. So we talked about the 4 kind of scales you should be aware of: the major / minor, the pentatonics, the bluegrass scale, and the 2 modes of the Mixolydian and the Dorian. This gives you a lot of ammo when you're improvising, okay? Remember, any of these things that you want, ask me in your lessons with me, and I will tab them out and record them for you. This is like an overview of the giant ocean of improvisation. Now we're going to jump down to item 4, the blues. Why do we talk about the blues so much when we're working together? Because it's the best style to learn how to improvise. Why? Well, first of all, it's slower, so we have more time to make mistakes. Then there's lots of rest. There's lots of silence when you hear blues music. You'll hear... This is just the drummer, and everyone else is just playing rests. Now, the blues scale. Let's talk about this. Here's the blues scale formula. 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, and then, of course, the 1 again. This is the same as the minor pentatonic scale. There are no bad notes in there. You cannot make a bad note with that blues scale. That's the beauty of this. So if you're in a jam and they're going G, C, G, and singing about whatever they're worried about, how global warming affects the dolphins and its trees are going to die or whatever. Then basically we're going to have a way that we can play our minor scale over it. So let's say, imagine this jam going on. And I'm playing this minor. No matter what I do on that scale, it's going to sound great. That's why I made all those 12-bar blues backing tracks on the site, so you can start playing your blues scales over the backing tracks. It's super, super fun. I want to teach you one of the most Jedi concepts in improvisation ever, and this is something I don't know if anyone else is teaching, but I'm going to share it with you. It's called three-phrase soloing. I love teaching this. It's so awesome. So, when you're playing in a blues jam, or any kind of thing that sounds bluesy, here's something that will make you go from 1 to like 99 instantly. You're going to play your instrument like a singer sings the blues, and here's what that means. Blues soloing equals 3 phrases. You may want to take notes of this. The first 2 are the same. The third is different. Let me demonstrate. Here's a classical blues verse done very badly by me. If we're going, I got me a new gal. She's as sweet as she can be. And then the blues is going to go up to the C. Guess what? I say the same thing. I got me a new gal. She's as sweet as she can be. Right? Now it goes to the 5 chord. I have to do something different. She comes home every night drunk and beats the crap out of me. Okay? So I'm just making up a hypothetical blues situation. But the idea here is that you can do that on your instrument. Check this out. If I go, that was my first phrase. Then here comes the C. Guess what? I'm doing the same thing. Right? Here comes the D chord. Now I have to play something different. Works with all instruments, no matter what you're playing. If you play something on the blues scale, then put some rest in, then play the same thing again, and then put some rest in, and then come back and do something different. Oh, man. Sounds like B.B. King. Sounds like Eric Clapton, because that's how they're playing. They're playing their instruments the same way they sing. Very important. And ultimately, improvisation is about connecting our instrument to our minds and hearts so we can talk through it. We want to speak through these things, not just play a bunch of notes. Let me demonstrate that one more time. Say I have a faster blues. C, G. Here's the D, C, D. Right? Basic 12-bar blues. Here's how I would play over that. See, I'm trying to imagine. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now wait. Here's the C. I got it. There's my third phrase. Again, here we go. Again. Different one. So basically, even though I'm playing a lot of notes, I had 3 things I said. I said the first thing twice, then I rhymed the third time. That's called 3-phrase soloing. It will change the way your improvisation sounds, I guarantee it. The next thing in the blues is really cool, and I want you to take notes on this. If you play 7th chord arpeggios, it's not as scary as it sounds, and double up the notes over a blues progression, guess what happens? Let's pretend we're in G. Okay, here's a G7. Remember, an arpeggio is just the notes of the chord. Right? What if I double up the notes? Same for C. We have something that occurs magically all of a sudden called the boogie, or for you professionals, the boogie woogie. This is a classic phrase we can steal. All you have to do is figure out the 1, 4, and 5 for the 3 chords. So in other words, if we're in G, we need the 1, 3, 5 for G, and the 7 on top. We go to C, you're going to go the 7th of C. We go to D, you're going to figure out the dominant 7th arpeggio for each chord. And I know this sounds complicated. And then double up the notes, and we have this. C. C. Again. Works for the mandolin, works for the guitar, works for the piano, works for the nose flute. Every single instrument. Let me demo on the mandolin real quick. So here's my G blues. I know I have G7, C7, and D7, right? Now, let's figure out the arpeggio for that. Here's my G7 arpeggio. Here's my C7 arpeggio. And my D7 arpeggio. Remember, an arpeggio is just picking the notes of a chord in succession. I double them up, I get this. C. Back to G. D. In solo, called the boogie woogie style, playing arpeggios. Finally, last but not least, you want to be collecting blues licks for your instrument. Banjo, guitar, mandolin, same thing. There's a stock of licks, small pre-composed fragments of 2 to 4 measures long. For example, on the mandolin, there's this. Classic Bill Monroe blues lick. I use that all the time. If I'm playing, I go, oh, bluesy. Okay, I got this. And that launches me into my scale. Same with the banjo. All kinds of blues licks for the banjo. Any of you who works with me regularly knows, whether it's melodic style or single string playing, we love the blues. So remind me at your lessons to get you some of these stock licks. Let's say you have one for G that sounds like this. Right? And let's say we have one C that sounds like this. Yes, you guessed it, same lick in a different key. Now, when we're playing, here's our blues starting out. I'm going to start out with that lick. Now my blues scale goes to C. Guess what I do? Same thing in C, back to the scale. Ooh, I'm going to do the same thing for D. Here we go. Now, I'm exaggerating. You wouldn't necessarily want to just play that one lick, but that would work. You could get away with that. That's the cool thing about the blues. There's a whole bunch of licks that work for all the keys. Blues is very important because it's slow, there's lots of silence, and the scales have no bad notes. What better way to start improvising? Like, you're not going to injure yourself unless you try really, really hard, and that's not the music, that's the lifestyle. Now, number 3, what we have is scale hacking. How to turn your scales into music. This is the big one. I kind of wish I had the entire hour to talk about this. I'm going to do my best to cover this subject. First of all, y'all have heard about the 4 R's. If you just take a scale, let's go to G major scale, and we add rest, randomizing, repetition, and rhythms. Different, and I wrote rhymes there, but I meant rhythms. I'm not teaching you spelling. So let me demonstrate. Take the most boring scale. Here's a G scale. Watch as I add the 4 R's. Rest, 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 rest. All of a sudden, it's not a scale. It's kind of a primitive melody. It's really weird. The French composer Claude Debussy was quoted as saying, "Music is the space between the notes." This is a great example of that. It's the silence that makes it musical, not the notes. Okay? Sorry, heavy metal people. Now, the second R, randomizing. We don't want to go up and down. We want to go a little bit up, a little bit down. Jump up, a little bit down. Anything we can do to not just ascend and descend. We want to disguise the scale by randomizing the notes. For example, I'm going to hang out here. I'm going to jump all the way to the top. Play just 3 notes. Jump to the middle. 2 notes. Back here. Skip a string. Back here. That's randomizing. Being unpredictable in how you climb around on this scale. Super important. Now, the next R, repetition. I like teaching this one. It's like magic. For some reason, and I wish I knew why, because I'd go on Oprah and become a millionaire if I had the answer to this, but I don't. For some reason, when you play 2 or 3 or 4 notes in a row, it sounds like you're really ripping it up and you're really expressing yourself. It's almost like cheating. I don't know why. Let me demonstrate. I'm just repeating the first 3 notes of the scale. And I go up again. How about I repeat 4 notes? Remember that lick, Adam? Did I put in that lesson for you? That was a blatant and shameless use of repetition to create an emotional response. Okay? So repeating is great. It can be 2 notes. 3 notes. 4 notes. 5 or 6 or whatever. But every now and then, remember to come out of the center of the river, eddy out, and go in little circles. That's what repetition. Finally, rhythms. Don't get stuck in playing the same length of note. Fast notes, slow notes, bouncy notes. For example, I went slow notes, faster yet. Slow. You want to vary up the speed of your notes in the scale, okay? After that, we have scale patterns. What's a scale pattern? You make patterns of the scale. How about we go 3 up and 1 down? Again. Scale patterns take the scale and stretch it out. It's really cool. This might be fun. Watch how much longer this scale pattern lasts. I made a pattern up and a pattern down, okay? Remind me to teach you scale patterns. I have them all tabbed out. And then we have creating phrases by talking, item C, under 3 on page 2, which is you're basically going to play something and then stop. That was my first phrase. Second phrase. I'm making sentences and commas. Very, very important. Item D, you guessed it. Here comes LHO again. Put those hammers in. Put those slides in. Put those pull-offs in. Always put those in. It'll make it sound less like a scale and more like a poorly executed solo. And then we have adding licks. We talked about that. Adding arpeggios. We talked about that. Must have arpeggios. You want to learn the major, the minor, and the 7th. There's a G major arpeggio. Right? There's a G minor arpeggio. The G7 arpeggio. If you have those 3 arpeggios, whatever instrument you're playing, you're ready for any chord because you have the 3 flavors. So once again, mandolin, G arpeggio, G minor, G7. Remember to learn those. We also have intervals. This is a funny thing. We call them double stops on the fiddle and mandolin, but that's when you play 2 notes together. Also great on the banjo. These are all things you can use during your scale to hack it up and make it not sound like a scale and sound like music. H, use multiple styles of backing tracks. When you're playing bluegrass, It's gymnastic. You're just trying to survive. I'm just like waiting for this to be over. I mean, you can't tell I'm in a lot of emotional pain because it's going by so quickly. Now, number 2, folk and country, more relaxing. Ooh, so much better. I can go. And then we have blues, my favorite, great for expression because of all the silence. Jazz we're not touching on. I'm doing a workshop in January about jazz, by the way. But that's complete freedom because every bad note you do, you can justify it and say you're a jazz musician. So that's a whole different ball game. You can still use that right now. If you make a bad note while improvising, just immediately repeat it. You're officially a jazz player.
I'm a jazz singer.
We all are jazz singers. My dog's a jazz singer. Really good. Good point. Now we have scatting. If you're it's not animal poo. It's a jazz phrase for singing along with the melody. Watch this. I'm a bad singer. I just yell at people. But you can still hum or sing along. It'll create different phrases. Here's my G scale. If I hum or sing along, for some reason, I do things I wouldn't have thought about otherwise. So in the comfort of your own home when no one's around, especially those you love, make sure that you experiment with humming or singing along with your scales. It'll surprise you. It really will. Now we come to the fun part. Number 4 on page 2, instrument-specific techniques. Every instrument has its own way to improvise, right? On the banjo, guess what? We have this delightful way of cheating with rolls. We play fast patterns over here. And we match the chords. That's a banjo-specific technique. We have licks in Scruggs style. And we have the melodic style of playing where we cross strings. So that's just for banjo. For mandolin, make sure you are able to do these instrument-specific techniques. We have tremolo. What a great thing to add to your flow. That's like very mandolin. We have double stops, those double notes. And finally, we have cross-picking, which is playing patterns of the strings. So everything in the class so far works for every single instrument. Now I'm talking about things that relate to a specific instrument. On the guitar, we have what's called Carter style, where we play strums between the melody notes. We have finger picking. We drop the pick entirely. So those are not available to the mandolin, for example, because we don't have low enough strings. So sometimes you have techniques that are for a specific instrument. Finally, item 5, you got to know your toolbox. If you sit down to improvise, I'd like all of you guys and gals to actually make a list and call this list toolbox. Or if you have a drummer, you can call him a toolbox too. I do all the time. So basically, you want to have a list of the things that you feel you can do off a moment's notice. The basic categories are scales and scale patterns. You got to know some scales. You got to know some scale patterns. Arpeggios. You really want to add some arpeggios to your toolbox. Licks, and then instrument-specific techniques. So I would say take item 5 from page 2 and make subcategories and be honest and write down what do you have that you can play if I'm jamming with you. Do you have 0 arpeggios? Well, then bring that up at our next lesson. Do you have a ton of them? Great. Do you have no licks? We got to learn some, okay? Item 6 is called having a net. You really want to have something you learned ahead of time. You want to have learned a lead for the song. So if you improvise and all of a sudden all the wheels fall off and you end up in a ditch on fire, you're able to run back to the part you knew and at least finish out your turn with, without slinking away with no dignity. So what I'm thinking is, let's say, back to that dreadful example of coming around the mountain. if I was going to improvise on that, I'd make sure I had a decent arrangement first that I knew by heart. I would have. That's something I've memorized. It's a tab I have. So then I can improvise, and all of a sudden, oh crap, I'm off in a ditch. I'm going to go back to my melody. You have to have something to get back to. You don't want to improvise just because you don't have a melody prepared. I do that, but that's dangerous. You want to have a net to fall back onto. And then we have knowing when not to improvise. I thought it'd be really funny to have this the last subject. Guess what? If you go into a jam session, and it happens to be in an Irish pub, I do like these jams, some of you probably know what they'll be doing. They'll be playing the same darn thing over and over again with no variation, which is cool in a way. It's like classical. You'll come in there and listen, they're doing this. You'll go away, come back in 45 minutes. They're doing this. It's great. It's learning melodies. So you wouldn't want to show up to that jam and it comes around to you and you do this. Don't be surprised if you don't get asked back. That would be like putting sauerkraut on your ice cream sundae. So you really want to be aware that there's certain areas, and here's what they are: traditional Irish music, classical music, and God forbid a singer-songwriter, or as I call them, singer-songwriter circles, because then we're supposed to simply play along with their chords and listen to their, their emotional pain. So there's really only 3 areas that I found by research that work terribly for improvising. That's classical music, of course, because if you Bach and blues do not get along. They simply don't. So with that being said, I cannot believe that I've covered most of the subjects in my outline. So now we have the luxury of a little time left to do some discussion, to do some question and answers. Last time we did this, no one wanted to mention anything, but I think we should raise your hand and let's talk about anything about this improvisation subject that you want to expound upon. Who would like to go? If you don't go, I'll pick someone, and that'll be scary. Yes. Hey, Christian. How you doing, man?
Good. I have a mode question. When you were playing Dorian mode, and you said you were in G major, you were playing is it still G major, but just a weird knockoff of it? Like, that's my confusion. Is it a different key, or are you straight up still in G major?
Very good point. I probably should have called it the minor Dorian and the major Mixolydian, because it's a minor mode. So the Dorian mode is actually a derivative of the minor scale.
Okay, so let me rephrase. Yeah, I meant Mixolydian actually, but I'm saying modes when you play a let's say Mixolydian or whatever over a major, it's still the major, right?
Yes. The Mixolydian is for major keys or major songs. The Dorian is for minor keys or minor songs. So that's why I always bring those 2 modes up, because it's so handy to have one mode that works for anything in the minor and another mode that works for anything in the major. It's really handy. There's more modes. There's a Phrygian, the Locrian, the Mixolydian. There's one that sounds like the Phrygian mode, really weird. Which, I mean, if you're at a belly dance show, maybe. But for most circumstances, well, if you're with a belly dance show with a banjo, you have a lot of questions to answer anyway. But for most circumstances, the Dorian mode is for minor songs. It's minor light. And the Mixolydian is for major songs. It's major with a slight twist of blues. Very good question. Anyone else before I select a victim? Yes. Hey, what's up, John?
Hi. So, talking about scales like major, minor, pentatonic, bluegrass, are they pattern driven like on a guitar with a banjo, or
pattern driven?
Like a pentatonic scale in a guitar, there's
yeah, for sure. Well, here's the thing. All scales should be pattern driven. See, the way they're taught is bad. They're taught wrong in most classes. They teach you this. That's toxic. After a while, as soon as you get that, you never want to be caught doing that. You want to be playing patterns. As soon as you get it, we go to patterns. So my rather unorthodox answer to that question would be, everything should be pattern driven. You should never play it up and down, just while you're learning it. Then hop back over to those R's and start chopping that up as soon as you can. Any other questions, comments? Otherwise, what I'm going to do is upload this class to YouTube, and those notes that you took, those are valuable compositions, valuable compost to bring up in our next class, and make sure we understand that to the nth degree. Let's any more questions, comments from the gang? Or are you just like sitting there in stunned silence, trying to work through your trauma? Okay, good. Well, then that's what therapy's for. No, this is a tough class to teach. This is like teaching someone to make up music on their own. How do you do that? That's like, okay, we'll get in the water and maybe you can swim kind of thing. Like, but remember, the bottom line is, here's your takeaway. Don't improvise by yourself. That's like swimming in a parking lot. Get in the water. You have to have a backing track, whether it's YouTube or my backing tracks. You really have to have a backing track. So basically, as soon as you get that groove, pick your scale, put in the R's, start improvising, and be ready to make a lot of bad notes for quite some time. I spent years of making very bad notes, hence being a jazz musician. But I've had a great time today. If no one has any further questions, I'm going to get right to editing this video and putting it up on YouTube. You know where to find it. It's at the YouTube channel for JamAlong, which you should be a subscriber if you're not. Make sure next time you're online, go to the events page. There's another workshop coming up I'm going to do on composing, how to write your own tunes. Another great subject. So definitely look into that. I will see all of you individually at your various lessons with me. So great that you attended. Thank you so much for making this. It would have been very awkward if it was just me. Awesome. Have a great week, and I'll be talking to everyone soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. See y'all soon.
To find out about upcoming workshops, click on the events page at jamalong.org, and you will see all of our upcoming classes.